Hello, folks. So, today we're going to talk about cops. I know, not really something I talk about a lot, but apparently, a group led by, and the link will be in the description for the story I'm looking at here, but a story off of Saltwire, which written by Peter Jackson. Not that Peter Jackson. Basically, an oversight group or whatever has suggested that Newfoundland end its contract with the RCMP. I'm good with that because, and as the article itself points out, Newfoundland would then be dependent on the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. I'm okay with that because one of the things I don't like about the RCMP is that they will take people out of their home jurisdiction and assign them somewhere else first. Yeah, that makes sense. Why do you want to be a cop? Well, I want to fight trouble in my community. Oh, okay, excellent. You're a cop. Now go patrol that community. But I want to help my... No, it doesn't work that way. Whereas with the RNC, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, who've been around at least as long as the RCMP, I believe, or at least has a heritage older than the RCMP, certainly. If we look at... No, that's probably wrong too, actually, come to think of it. Anyway, that's not the point. The point I'm going to make... Excuse me while I adjust my camera angle slightly. The point I wanted to make here is that the RCMP, as a massive national organization, has far too much influence. They're involved in intelligence gathering operations for the feds, amongst other things. Okay, so let them do that. Why you have the same organization handling speeding tickets that you have handling international drug smuggling is beyond me. Obviously, their budget must be fucking enormous, which, of course, is taxpayer funded. But the reason I would be in favor of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary taking the role from the RCMP is that the RNC would not be strangers to Newfoundland. You wouldn't have some random rookie from... I was hunting for a nicer adjective. Just gave up and said rookie. But you could end up with some absolutely unaware rookie being plopped in the middle of rural Newfoundland. And if they're from Ontario, Manitoba, the Yukon, and they're suddenly plopped into the middle of what is a very different culture, to the point that even some of the language we use is very different, which is something I'm going to cover probably on the next Terra Nova Tuesday. Yeah, I think I'm just going to start doing a little series every now and again, or try to set different series during the week. For example, tomorrow is Poetry Wednesday. If I recall correctly, the poem for tomorrow is Invictus. Which, if you thought The Walrus and the Carpenter was short, you're going to absolutely hate because it's even shorter. But that'll be premiering at noon Newfoundland time tomorrow. Speaking of things coming up, I will be on Patriot Brunchcast's stream tonight. I believe 7 o'clock Newfoundland time, so 5:30 Eastern. Let's see. But yeah, if you've got some rookie from the Yukon, for example, who gets suddenly dropped in the middle of rural Newfoundland and starts hearing phrases like, oh, don't be talking, or go away with you, they're not going to understand what those phrases mean. And I better explain for my viewers who aren't from Newfoundland. When we say don't be talking, it doesn't mean shut up. It means we agree with you and no more needs to be said. It is essentially shut up, but it's shut up in a way that basically says, look, I agree with you. We don't need to keep going over this. And go away with you is a little more difficult to explain. Go away with you, go on. Yeah. Oof, how do I explain that one? It can be an expression of disbelief. It can be, yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it, as an expression of disbelief. Friendly disbelief, not I'm calling you a liar disbelief. Though it can be, yeah, tone matters as well. Ashes. But yeah, just to get back on the original point rather than continue with this digression. The RNC is recruited and hired within the province it operates in, which means while there may be some mild linguistic issues between someone from, say, St. Anthony and St. John's, or someone from Port aux Basques to, well, say Buren, while there are some far more minor linguistic differences, the culture is the same. And that means the initial reaction to hearing things like don't be talking, or go on, or go away with you, that initial response is not necessarily going to be, my authority is being challenged. No, that's not at all what those phrases mean. Newfoundlanders are far more blunt. If we're telling you to go away, you generally hear go away, or if you've really set us off, fuck off. The Viking, some of the Viking language is still pretty strong here. But on a purely logistical scale, if the RNC were funded here, their budget would be much smaller. Well, the RNC's budget as it stands would obviously balloon intensely, but oversight would be civilian, most likely. Currently, the head of the RNC reports directly to the Justice Minister. That makes it a governmental organization. Not really great. Currently, the RNC, if I recall correctly, only handles 2 towns, 2 cities here in Newfoundland. Maybe 3. It may be Corner Brook, Gander, and St. John's. It may only be Corner Brook and St. John's. I'm not 100% sure. But carrying on 3 of 12's point from last night's stream, excuse me. The decentralization of authority, go away fly, but the decentralization of authority in general is a good thing. If you have a smaller body to deal with, that makes every single little problem much more, it makes you much more capable of dealing with them. If, for example, say something that would be on a federal scale or a national scale ignored based on budget requirements, time constraints, etc. With a more decentralized power, with something that is only provincial, then they don't have to worry about, I'm sorry, and I do apologize, I'm a little scattered this morning. The concern, whatever the concern is because it's so much more of a small scale issue, it's something that can be dealt with much more easily and is much more likely to be dealt with and properly resolved. Whereas something that is being tackled by a national organization, an organization that is applied nationwide as opposed to province-wide, something that would be considered important on a provincial scale could be considered completely irrelevant nationally. One of the things that comes to mind is the issue of police overreach, for example. With a national force, for example, what we saw during the trucker protests in Ottawa, where we had our RCMP officers almost trampling protesters. No one knows where those cops are from for a couple of reasons. Because the RCMP will take their newest recruits and move them away from their home jurisdictions, and because as a national organization, the RCMP could have someone from BC patrolling in Quebec. They could have someone from Newfoundland patrolling in Manitoba, for example. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, one of the problems I can foresee with it, as I said earlier, is a cultural disconnect. Not only that, but it's much harder to hold someone to account if you don't know where they're from. If an RNC officer steps out of his authority, oversteps, overreaches, whatever term you want to use, they're not going to be able to say, oh, I'm not from here. They're from here. And when someone is from here, from where you are, there's a shared culture that they are expected to adhere to. Granted, the law is the law, but, and I really dislike that I have to couch this carefully, but body language, linguistic tics, things like that, these will matter when you're dealing with a police officer, because if they're training, oh, that's my alarm. It's 6:30 in the morning. Normally I'm up, but where you have an authority figure who's part of the culture that they're acting as an authority figure over, it creates a much greater rapport between the people being served, for lack of a better word, and those who are in authority. It's kind of a weird quirk of Newfoundland culture that if you're pulled over by an RNC officer, it's quite possible that you are related or know someone related to that officer. It's far more likely than if it's an RCMP officer. And that kind of creates more accountability in both directions. Because the officer himself, because he's from the culture that he's policing, is going to be much more likely to act within his authority and to avoid escalation of conflict. Simply because next week he might have to go to church with that person, or he might have to take his kids to the same school that that person's kids are attending. With an RCMP officer, while that may hold true community to community, the problem is that there's no cultural connection there. And as I say, that cultural connection can lead to far better outcomes for everybody. There's a reason that I'll use the word Indian. If it's wrong, someone correct me, but the Indian reserves here in Canada prefer to have members of the band be the police officers. They prefer to have their own policing. And I completely understand that. Because ideally, the officer who's from the culture, from the people, is going to be much more dedicated to the good outcome for his people. That means they're much less likely to take advantage of their position. They're much less likely to escalate where no escalation is needed. They may be unlikely to escalate where escalation is needed. But by the same token, they're also going to be more aware of who's having problems at home, who's having problems with alcohol, substances. So they'll have these things in their head anyway. Like they'll be more prepared to deal with someone to get a good outcome because of this insider knowledge. And one would hope they would be a better cop because they would be more prepared to catch deception or someone who's trying to operate outside the law in some fashion, whether smuggling, poaching, what have you. I know smuggling and poaching are not police matters here in Newfoundland, but that's kind of beside the point. I'm just using those as examples. But I do keep going back to the idea that decentralized authority is a better choice all the way around. So that's my 10 cents by this time, I imagine. Anyway, I've been talking about 18 minutes, most of it rambling, and I do apologize for that. But, like, share, subscribe, comment. Have a look at the subscribe star if you're interested. I'll be on Patriot Brunchcast's stream today. I'll be on Caucasian Sasquatch's Thursday. The poem is tomorrow. I'll probably keep doing Terra Nova Tuesdays. Monday movie review. Next week, I have what I think will be an interesting combination. The Monday movie review and the Wednesday poem will be connected. It will be a much longer poem than I normally read, so I suspect I'll have all kinds of quality issues. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see those two kind of put together. Next Terra Nova Tuesday will be a slang session, since I had to explain a couple of expressions today. I'll explain a couple of more next time. Other than that, folks, I think I'm done. Yeah, okay. So, I hope you're having a good day. I hope you continue to have good days. And rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.